The Galactic Federation Military Academy floated serenely in the void between three star systems, its massive structure gleaming like a silver jewel against the backdrop of infinite space. Within its halls, representatives from over 800 species trained together, learned together, and prepared to defend the galaxy together. Well, almost all species. Cadet ZYX Thera's four eyes focused intently on the holographic display floating above her study pod. The Valterian's crystalline skin shimmered with curiosity as she scrolled through military regulations, searching for information about optimal squad compositions for her advanced tactics assignment. Her elongated fingers, each ending in a sensitive tactile pad, danced across the control interface with practiced precision. "Hey, ZYX," called out her study partner, a bulky Gornish named Threk whose rocky exterior housed a surprisingly analytical mind. His stone-like features shifted into what passed for a grin among his people. "Found anything interesting for the assignment?" "Actually, yes," ZYX Thera replied, her melodic voice carrying a note of confusion. "I keep running into these restricted files. Look at this." She gestured to her display, where a red warning symbol pulsed ominously. "Every time I try to access historical combat data involving humans, I get blocked." Threk lumbered over, his massive frame causing the floor to vibrate slightly with each step. "Humans? You mean those pink bipeds from Sector 7? I thought they were just merchants and diplomats." "That's what I thought too," ZYX Thera said, her tail twitching with growing interest. "But, according to these partial records, they had some kind of military involvement with the Federation about 300 years ago." "Then, nothing. Complete information blackout." A third voice joined their conversation, this one carrying the distinctive harmonic overtones of a melodic. Cadet Singera glided over on her hovering platform, her translucent form rippling with colors that indicated intense curiosity. "Did someone mention humans? My grandmother served during the sector wars. She always got this strange look whenever humans were mentioned, but she never explained why." "See? It's not just me," ZYX Thera said, gesturing excitedly. "There's definitely something here. Some kind of mystery." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Cadet Kreshtar, a proud Zephyrian whose feathered crest bristled with authority. As one of the top students in their class, he often appointed himself the voice of reason. "What are you three gossiping about now? We have a major tactical assessment tomorrow." "We're trying to figure out why humans are banned from military service," Singera explained, her colors shifting to a determined orange-red pattern. Kreshtar's golden eyes narrowed. "Banned? That's ridiculous. The Federation doesn't ban entire species from service. There are restrictions based on physical capabilities, sure, but outright bans? That would violate the Equality Charter." "Then, explain this," ZYX Thera said, turning her display toward him. The screen showed a long list of military roles and positions, each marked with species compatibility ratings. Every entry she scrolled past showed humans as restricted, classified authorization required. The Zephyrian's crest flattened against his skull, a sign of deep confusion. This is unprecedented. I've never seen anything like this." "There has to be a logical explanation," Threk rumbled, his practical nature asserting itself. "Maybe they have some kind of biological incompatibility with standard equipment? Or perhaps they're too fragile for military operations?" Singera's form shimmered with skeptical blues and purples. "I've met humans. They're not particularly fragile. In fact, they seem quite robust compared to some of the species that serve in combat roles." "Wait," ZYX Thera said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with inspiration. "What if we approach this differently? Instead of looking at current regulations, what if we search the historical archives? There might be records from before the restriction was put in place." Kreshtar preened his feathers thoughtfully. "The deep archives require special access permissions. We'd need a faculty sponsor. Or," Threk said with a mischievous glint in his rocky features, "we could ask someone who already has access." All eyes turned to the far corner of the study hall, where a lone figure sat hunched over an advanced research terminal. Cadet Prime Unit 7742, or 7 as they preferred to be called, was an artificial intelligence housed in a sleek mechanical body. As an AI, 7 had unrestricted access to most Academy databases for research purposes. The group approached cautiously. 7 was known to be helpful but also brutally logical, and they weren't always interested in what they considered frivolous investigations. 7. Zyxthera called softly. The AI's optical sensors swiveled toward them with a soft whirring sound. "Greetings, organic colleagues," 7 said in their precisely modulated voice. "I deduce from your formation and facial expressions that you require assistance with something that may not be entirely within standard parameters." "You could say that," Singara replied, her colors shifting nervously. "We're trying to research the historical military involvement of humans, but we keep running into classified restrictions." 7's optical array focused intently on them for a moment. "Ah. The human question. I have observed 2,347 cadets over my operational period express curiosity about this topic. None have been successful in obtaining satisfactory answers through conventional channels." "So you know about the restrictions?" Kreshtar asked. "I am aware of their existence," 7 confirmed. "I am also aware that the classification level is unusually high for what appears to be historical military data. This has led me to develop what you might call curiosity about the matter." Threk leaned forward eagerly. "So you'll help us?" "I will assist in a research project that has legitimate academic merit," 7 replied carefully. "However, I must warn you that accessing classified material carries significant risks." "What kind of risks?" Zyxthera asked. "Academic probation, expulsion, and, in extreme cases, charges of espionage," 7 listed matter-of-factly. "However, I have identified a potential avenue of investigation that may yield results without triggering security protocols." The group exchanged glances. The risk was real, but so was their curiosity. "What did you have in mind?" Singara asked. 7's mechanical form shifted slightly, a gesture their designers had programmed to indicate consideration. "The Academy's archives contain not just official records, but also personal logs, training videos, and other supplementary materials. These secondary sources are often archived under different classification levels. If we search for references to human military personnel in these materials, we might uncover information that wasn't deliberately classified." "That's brilliant," Zyxthera said, her skin shimmering with excitement. "It's like finding pieces of a puzzle scattered across different boxes." "Precisely," 7 agreed. "However, this will require considerable time and computational resources. Are you prepared to invest several weeks in this investigation?" The 5 cadets looked at each other. They were all high-achieving students with demanding course loads, but the mystery had captured their imagination completely. "We're in," Kreshtar said, speaking for the group. "But we need to be smart about this. We can't let our regular studies suffer, and we can't draw attention to what we're doing." "Agreed," 7 said. "I suggest we establish a research schedule. 2 hours each evening, rotating locations to avoid patterns that might alert Academy security systems." Over the following days, the unlikely team threw themselves into their investigation with growing determination. They met in different locations each night, sometimes in 7's lab, sometimes in unused classrooms, occasionally in the recreational areas where casual conversation was expected. Their method was systematic but painstaking. 7 would identify potential data sources, then each team member would take responsibility for searching through different categories of material. Zyxthera focused on tactical manuals and training documentation. Threk examined equipment and logistics records. Singara reviewed personnel files and service records. Kreshtar analyzed strategic reports and battle summaries. 7 coordinated their efforts and cross-referenced their findings. For the first week, they found almost nothing. Occasional mentions of Terran auxiliaries or Sol system representatives, but no detailed information. The few references they discovered were frustratingly vague, as if whoever had written them assumed the reader already knew the full context. "This is impossible," Kreshtar said after yet another fruitless evening. "It's like they systematically scrubbed every meaningful reference." "Not scrubbed," 7 corrected. "Reclassified. I'm detecting patterns in the data gaps that suggest a comprehensive review was conducted at some point, probably around 280 years ago." "That's oddly specific," Singara noted, her colors shifting to curious yellow-green. "It corresponds to the end of what the records call the Pacification Wars," 7 explained. "A series of conflicts involving rebellious outer systems. After that point, references to human military personnel effectively disappear from the public record." "So whatever happened, it happened during those wars," Zyxthera concluded. That would be a logical assumption, Seven agreed. I suggest we focus our search on that time period specifically. It was Threk who made the breakthrough, 3 days later. He'd been searching through archived maintenance logs, looking for any mention of human-specific equipment or modifications, when he stumbled across something unexpected. Seven, you need to see this, he called out, his rocky features animated with excitement. The team gathered around his terminal as he pulled up the file. It's a maintenance request from the archive storage facility, he explained. Look at the date stamp. Seven's optical sensors focused on the screen. This was filed yesterday. Someone requested access to sealed storage unit 7441 Tango 7. Why is that significant? Singera asked. Because, Seven said, their processor's working rapidly, that storage designation follows the pattern used for combat footage archives. And, the access request was filed by someone with Level 9 clearance. Level 9? Kreshtar's crest flattened with shock. That's Academy Command level clearance. Who would need to access old combat footage at that level? Seven was already running searches through their available databases. The request was filed by Commandant Veltaresh herself. She's scheduled to review the contents tomorrow at 1400 hours. The Commandant personally? ZYXthera's four eyes widened. What could be in those files that would require her direct attention? I don't know, Seven admitted, but I believe this represents a unique opportunity. If the Commandant is personally reviewing material related to our investigation, it suggests that our research has touched on something genuinely significant. You mean we should try to see what she's looking at? Threk asked. I mean we should consider whether the risk of observation is justified by the potential for discovery, Seven replied diplomatically. The team looked at each other nervously. What they were contemplating was far beyond their previous activities. Actually spying on the Academy Commandant could result in immediate expulsion or worse. I vote we do it, ZYXthera said quietly. We've come this far. And, something tells me this might be our only chance to get real answers. I agree, Singera added, her form glowing with determined orange hues. Whatever secret they're keeping, it's big enough to maintain for 3 centuries. That makes it worth knowing. Threk nodded his massive head. Count me in. All eyes turned to Kreshtar. The Zephyrian was known for his rule-following nature, and his decision would likely determine whether they proceeded. This violates approximately 17 different Academy regulations, he said slowly. And it could destroy all of our careers. The others began to look disappointed, but then, Kreshtar's crest rose to full height, a sign of determined resolve. But I've never walked away from a challenge yet, and I'm not starting now. Let's find out why humans are too dangerous for war. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Each of the conspirators attended their regular classes, but their minds were elsewhere, planning and worrying about their evening mission. They had agreed to meet in Seven's private laboratory at 1330 hours, giving them time to prepare before the Commandant's scheduled review at 1400. Seven had spent the morning creating what they called a monitoring solution. Using their legitimate access to Academy systems, they had identified the route the Commandant would take to the archives and had planted tiny sensor devices at strategic points. These sensors, designed for mechanical diagnostics, could be repurposed to capture audio and limited visual data without triggering security protocols. The beauty of this approach, Seven explained as they gathered in the lab, is that the sensors are supposed to be there. They're part of the routine maintenance monitoring system. No one will question their presence. ZYXthera nervously polished her crystalline skin, a habit that emerged when she was anxious. What if she detects them anyway? Commandants don't get to their position by being careless. The risk exists, Seven admitted, but it's acceptable. These devices are passive sensors with minimal electromagnetic signatures. Detection would require active scanning with equipment that wouldn't normally be present in that corridor. Kreshtar preened his feathers restlessly. And if we're caught? Then, we accept the consequences, Threk said with characteristic directness. But we've come too far to turn back now. Singera's form rippled with nervous energy, colors shifting rapidly between blue anxiety and yellow anticipation. How will we receive the data from the sensors? Seven activated a display panel on their workstation. Real-time transmission to this terminal. We'll be able to monitor everything as it happens. At exactly 1,350 hours, they positioned themselves around Seven's workstation. The AI sensors tracked the Commandant's approach through the Academy's internal monitoring system.
"She's entering Corridor 7 Delta now," Seven reported. "Estimated arrival at storage facility in 4 minutes." The team watched tensely as the tracking display showed the Commandant's steady progress through the Academy's corridors.
At 13:59, the first sensor picked up her approach.
Commandant Veltaresh was an imposing figure even through the grainy sensor feed.
A member of the Kethmori species, she stood nearly 3 meters tall, her forearms moving with practiced military precision. Her scaled skin bore the ceremonial scarification that marked her as a veteran of 17 major campaigns, and her large, multifaceted eyes missed nothing as she moved through the facility.
"Audio coming online," Seven whispered, adjusting the feed quality.
They could hear the soft whisper of the Commandant's breathing apparatus and the rhythmic tap of her clawed feet against the metal flooring. She approached a heavily secured door marked with symbols they didn't recognize. "Archive access granted," came an automated voice from the door's security system.
"Welcome, Commandant Veltaresh. Please verify your identity for final authorization."
The Commandant placed one of her hands against a scanner, and her voice, deep and commanding, spoke a lengthy phrase in what sounded like ancient Kethmori military code.
"Authorization confirmed. Storage Unit 7441 Tango 7 is now accessible.
Please note that all materials in this unit carry Level 9 classification. Recording and transmission devices are strictly prohibited within the viewing chamber." The students exchanged nervous glances. If the chamber had anti-recording countermeasures, their sensors might be detected after all.
"Understood," the Commandant replied. "I require approximately 30 minutes for review."
The door cycled open with a heavy mechanical sound, and they watched as the Commandant disappeared inside. For several long minutes, nothing happened.
The sensors picked up only ambient sounds from the corridor.
"Maybe the countermeasures blocked our feed," Kreshtar suggested.
"No," Seven said, studying their instruments carefully.
"The sensors are still functional. She simply moved beyond their range." Then, suddenly, sound emerged from the chamber. Not the Commandant's voice, but something else. Something that made all 5 students freeze in shock. It was music. Specifically, it was what sounded like military marching music, but unlike anything they had ever heard before. The rhythm was aggressive, almost violent in its intensity. The melody was complex but driving, with undertones that seemed to speak directly to something primal in the listener's mind.
"What is that?"
Singara whispered, her form turning a disturbed shade of purple.
"Human music," Seven said with certainty.
"I've heard similar compositions in the cultural archives. But this particular piece is not in any public database." The music was joined by other sounds.
The rhythmic tramping of feet in perfect unison.
Voices raised in what could only be described as a war chant, though the words were unintelligible through the audio distortion. Then, cutting through everything else, came a new sound that made them all recoil instinctively. It was a shout, a battle cry that carried such raw aggression and determination that it seemed to bypass conscious thought and strike directly at their most primitive fight-or-flight responses. By the ancient stones, Threk breathed, his rocky exterior actually trembling slightly.
"What kind of beings make sounds like that?"
The audio continued, and, gradually they began to hear other elements. The whine of energy weapons, but not the clean, precise sounds of modern Federation armaments. These weapons had a raw, brutal quality to their discharge. The sounds of explosions echoed through the chamber, but, again, they were different from contemporary ordnance.
Messier. More chaotic.
And, underlying everything was something that took them several minutes to identify, the sound of physical combat. Not the regulated, civilized dueling they practiced in academy training, but actual, brutal, no-holds-barred fighting. The impact of fists and improvised weapons against armor. Grunts of pain and effort. The wet sounds that suggested serious injuries were being inflicted and received. "This is combat footage," Zyxthara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's like nothing we've studied in any of our tactical courses." "It's wrong," Kreshtar said, his military training rebelling against what he was hearing.
"Combat should be precise, controlled, strategic. This sounds like chaos."
Seven's processors were working frantically to analyze and categorize the sounds. "I'm detecting audio patterns consistent with close-quarters combat," But the tactical signatures are unlike anything in Federation military doctrine. The humans appear to be engaging in simultaneous melee and ranged combat, with no apparent regard for standard engagement protocols.
A new element entered the audio feed, voices shouting in what was clearly human language. Even through the distortion, they could hear the emotional intensity in those voices. Commands being barked with absolute authority. Responses given with unwavering determination.
And, underneath it all, something that chilled them to their cores, humans who sounded like they were enjoying themselves. "They're laughing," Singara said in disbelief, her colors cycling through confused patterns.
In the middle of combat, they're actually laughing. Not just laughing, Seven corrected grimly. Analysis suggests they're experiencing elevated emotional states consistent with excitement and satisfaction. They appear to be deriving pleasure from the combat experience. The footage continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. They heard the sounds of vehicles being destroyed, structures collapsing, and, throughout it all, the relentless advance of human forces who seemed to treat overwhelming odds as a personal challenge rather than a tactical disadvantage. Then, suddenly, silence fell over the chamber. The combat sounds faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the facility's environmental systems. "Is it over?" Threk asked.
Before anyone could answer, they heard the commandant's voice for the first time since she had entered the chamber. But, now, instead of her usual commanding tone, she sounded shaken, almost disturbed.
"Computer, display casualty analysis for Operation Broken Chain, Final Battle."
A new voice responded, clearly an AI system within the archive chamber.
"Displaying casualty data now. Warning, some personnel may find these statistics disturbing."
The commandant was quiet for a long moment before speaking again.
Terran forces numbered approximately 2,000 personnel. Enemy forces numbered approximately 50,000.
Terran casualties, 847 dead, 1,891 wounded.
Enemy casualties.
She paused, and, when she continued, her voice carried a note of disbelief despite the fact that she must have seen these numbers before. Enemy casualties, 48,203 dead, 1,247 captured, 550 missing and presumed dead. The students stared at each other in shock. Those numbers seemed impossible. A force of 2,000 had engaged an enemy force of 50,000 and, not only won, but had achieved a casualty ratio that defied every principle of military science they had ever learned. "That can't be correct," Kreshtar said flatly. "The tactical mathematics don't work. A force that outnumbered would have defensive advantages, superior positioning, more firepower."
"Unless," Seven said slowly, "the smaller force possessed some capability that rendered traditional tactical mathematics irrelevant."
The commandant's voice continued from the chamber. "Computer, display psychological evaluation reports for Terran combatants post-battle."
Psychological evaluations complete. Summary: 96% of surviving Terran personnel showed no signs of post-combat stress syndrome. 73% reported high satisfaction with mission outcome. 81% requested immediate reassignment to active combat duties. Note, these results are unprecedented in Federation military psychological databases. Another long pause from the commandant. Then, "Computer, remind me why the Terran combat restriction was implemented." The Terran combat restriction was implemented following Operation Broken Chain and 17 similar engagements where Terran forces demonstrated combat effectiveness that exceeded all established parameters for biological entities. Specific concerns noted: apparent immunity to conventional psychological warfare, escalating aggression in response to casualties, tactical adaptability that rendered standard countermeasures ineffective, and what review board members described as unnatural enthusiasm for combat situations. The commandant sighed heavily. And the psychological impact on Allied forces? Allied forces serving alongside Terran units reported elevated stress levels, decreased combat effectiveness, and what medical personnel described as moral injury resulting from exposure to Terran combat methods. 67% of non-Terran personnel who served in integrated units requested transfer to assignments without Terran involvement. Even after all these years, the commandant muttered, "It's still hard to believe." They heard the sound of her moving around the chamber, presumably reviewing additional materials. "Computer, play recording from Admiral Kefvar's final report on Terran integration." A new voice filled the chamber, elderly and dignified, but carrying undertones of exhaustion and strain. "To the Federation High Command,
after extensive observation and analysis, it is my professional opinion that continued integration of Terran forces into Federation military operations represents an unacceptable risk to the psychological and moral well-being of our personnel. While Terran combat effectiveness is undeniably superior, their approach to warfare is fundamentally incompatible with Federation military principles. The Admiral's voice paused, then continued with obvious reluctance. To put it simply, Terrans do not fight like civilized beings. They fight like predators who have found their perfect prey. They show no mercy to enemies, no restraint in their methods, and no apparent limit to the violence they are willing to inflict or endure. Most disturbing of all, they seem to genuinely enjoy the experience of combat in ways that our other species find deeply unsettling.
Another pause, longer this time.
I have served in 17 major campaigns across my career, and I have never encountered anything like a human soldier who has decided that victory is worth any price. They will sacrifice themselves without hesitation, but, more troubling, they will sacrifice anyone and anything else as well if it serves their tactical objectives. They view civilian casualties as regrettable but acceptable. They treat prisoners as sources of information first and beings second.
They adapt to loss by becoming more aggressive, not less. The Admiral's voice grew quieter, more personal.
Yesterday, I watched a Terran squad leader order his men to hold a position against impossible odds.
6 humans against 300 enemy soldiers. They not only held the position, they launched a counterattack.
When I asked the squad leader how he could order his men to almost certain death, he looked at me like I had asked him why water was wet.
Because someone had to, he said.
And we're very good at impossible things.
A final pause, then, the Admiral's conclusion. Recommendation: immediately discontinue all integrated operations involving Terran military personnel. Establish permanent non-combat roles for human Federation members. Classification level: maximum security. The galaxy is not ready to know what humans are capable of when they decide that something is worth fighting for. The recording ended, leaving the chamber in silence again.
The students sat frozen, trying to process what they had learned. Their innocent investigation into administrative curiosities had revealed something that challenged their fundamental understanding of warfare, civilization, and their place in the galaxy. The Commandant's voice broke the silence one final time.
Computer, seal chamber and update access logs. Mark this review as routine administrative oversight.
Confirmed, Commandant.
Chamber sealed. Access logged. Have a pleasant day.
They heard the heavy door cycling shut, and, within moments, 7 sensors picked up the Commandant's departure from the corridor.
For a long time, none of them spoke.
They stared at the now silent workstation, each lost in their own thoughts as they tried to come to terms with what they had learned.
Finally, Freck broke the silence. No wonder they were banned, he said quietly.
They weren't banned because they were too weak for combat. They were banned because they were too good at it. The revelation from the archive chamber left the group of cadets fundamentally changed. Over the next several days, they moved through their regular classes like beings in a trance, their minds constantly returning to what they had learned. The casual assumptions that had guided their understanding of warfare and civilization had been shattered, replaced by disturbing questions that had no easy answers.
It was Singara who finally voiced what they were all thinking during one of their evening study sessions. "We can't stop here," she said, her bioluminescent form pulsing with troubled colors. "What we heard was just one operation, one battle. If humans fought in 17 similar engagements, there's more to learn."
Zyxthera's crystalline skin had lost some of its usual luster, dulled by stress and confusion.
"Are we sure we want to learn more? What we've already discovered is..."
She struggled for words.
"It's horrifying. These humans, they're nothing like the ones we've met in diplomatic contexts."
"That's exactly why we need to understand," Kreshtar said, his military mindset asserting itself despite his obvious discomfort. "There's clearly a fundamental disconnect between the humans who serve as ambassadors and traitors, and the ones who fought in these wars."
"How is that possible? Are they the same species?"
7 had been unusually quiet since their discovery, their processors apparently working overtime to integrate this new information with their existing knowledge base.
"I have been analyzing the available data," they said finally.
"The humans described in these military reports exhibit behavioral patterns that are consistent with their known biology, but expressed in ways that we had not previously observed."
"What do you mean?" Threk asked. "Consider human evolution," 7 explained.
They are apex predators from a high-gravity world with an extremely competitive ecosystem. Their entire development as a species was shaped by constant warfare with their environment, with other species, and, most significantly, with each other.
7 activated a holographic display showing various human physiological data. Look at their physical design.
Forward-facing eyes for predator vision. Extensive musculature for both power and endurance. Highly developed problem-solving capabilities specifically adapted for overcoming obstacles and defeating enemies. Most telling of all, they are one of the few species we know of that actually becomes more effective under stress rather than less.
All species are shaped by evolution, Singera pointed out.
That doesn't explain why they're so different in combat situations.
Because, 7 continued, most species evolved to be efficient in their environmental niche. Humans evolved to survive constant extinction-level threats.
They didn't develop civilization despite being warriors, they developed it because they were such effective warriors that they needed complex social structures to avoid destroying themselves.
The implications of this analysis hung heavy in the air.
They were discussing their fellow Federation citizens, beings they had shared meals with and studied alongside, as if they were dangerous predators wearing masks of civilization.
There has to be more information, Extraterrestrial said finally.
Military operations generate enormous amounts of documentation.
Personnel files, tactical analyses, equipment reports, medical data. If we could access more of these records,
the risk would be enormous, Kreshtar warned.
After what we did with the Commandant's review, security will be heightened. Any attempt to access more classified material could trigger investigations. Not necessarily, 7 said thoughtfully. I have been analyzing patterns in the archive classification system. The materials we accessed were classified as Level 9 because they contained comprehensive operational details.
But, supporting documents are often classified at lower levels.
Supporting documents? Threk asked. Personnel records, medical files, psychological evaluations, equipment requisitions.
The individual pieces might not seem significant enough to warrant maximum security, but, together they could provide a much more complete picture.
Singera's colors shifted to determined orange.
Then, we need to find these supporting documents.
Even if it takes months. I agree, Extraterrestrial said.
But, we need to be smarter this time.
More careful. 7's optical array focused intently on each of them in turn.
I must point out that we are now contemplating a systematic investigation that could be considered espionage.
The consequences of discovery would be severe.
The consequences of ignorance might be worse, Kreshtar said quietly.
If there really are aspects of human nature that the Federation has decided to hide, don't we have a right to know? We're training to be military officers.
How can we serve effectively if we don't understand the true nature of one of our member species? It was a compelling argument, and, one by one, they committed to continuing their investigation. Over the following weeks, they developed a sophisticated approach to their research. 7 identified dozens of potential sources, categorized by classification level and likelihood of containing useful information. They established a rotation system where each team member would access different databases at different times, making their activity appear random rather than coordinated. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Threk, while researching equipment specifications, discovered a series of requisition forms from 290 years ago that painted a disturbing picture of human military needs. Look at this, he said during one of their clandestine meetings.
These are supply requests for something called Operation Crimson Dawn.
The humans were asking for medical supplies in quantities that don't make sense.
He displayed the requisition forms on 7's workstation.
Standard combat operations plan for casualties of maybe 10 to 15% of forces. These humans were requisitioning medical supplies for casualties of 60 to 70%. That's insane, Kreshtar said. No military commander would plan operations with casualty projections like that. Unless, 7 observed, they had reason to believe such casualties were not only acceptable but expected.
Singera studied the forms more carefully. What's this item here?
Psychological resilience enhancers, quantity 500 units.
7 quickly cross-referenced the item code.
These appear to be chemical compounds designed to suppress fear and pain responses. Highly regulated substances in modern Federation military operations.
They were drugging themselves? Extraterrestrial asked in horror.
No, 7 corrected, analyzing the data more thoroughly.
According to the usage notes, these were administered to non-human personnel serving alongside human units. The humans themselves required no psychological enhancement. This revelation led them to search for more medical records, which yielded increasingly disturbing information. They found reports from Federation medical officers who had treated both human and non-human personnel during integrated operations. One report, written by a melodic medical officer named Harmony Talasha, provided particularly chilling insights. Day 47 of Operation Stellar Hammer. I am increasingly concerned about the psychological welfare of our non-Terran personnel. The humans appear unaffected by the constant combat stress, but our other species are showing severe strain. The Zephyrians have requested transfer en masse. The Veltarians are experiencing what can only be described as cultural shock. Day 52. Witnessed human combat tactics firsthand today. A squad of 8 Terrans encountered approximately 40 enemy soldiers in a prepared defensive position. Standard tactical doctrine would call for withdrawal and request for artillery support. Instead, the Terrans divided into 2 groups. One group created a distraction while the other flanked the enemy position. What happened next challenges everything I understand about combat psychology. The distraction group deliberately drew enemy fire, accepting casualties to maintain the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, the flanking group attacked with such ferocity that the enemy position collapsed within minutes. The Terrans who had been wounded in the initial engagement rejoined the attack despite their injuries. Most disturbing of all, when I attempted to treat the wounded Terrans, they expressed annoyance at being kept from the fighting. One human, with a severe leg wound that should have incapacitated him, asked me to patch him up quick so he could get back in there before his squad had all the fun. I am beginning to understand why integration protocols are under review. The humans are not cruel or sadistic, but they appear to process the reality of combat in ways that are fundamentally alien to other Federation species. The medical officer's reports continued for weeks, documenting instance after instance of human behavior that defied conventional understanding. Humans who fought more effectively when injured. Humans who volunteered for suicide missions with genuine enthusiasm. Humans who showed no psychological trauma from experiences that left other species permanently scarred. But it was a report from the operations intelligence officer that provided the most significant revelation. Commander Castelliron, a senior Kethmori intelligence specialist, had been tasked with analyzing human psychological profiles to better understand their combat effectiveness. After extensive observation and analysis, the commander had written, "I believe I have identified the key factor that makes Terran soldiers so effective and so disturbing to serve alongside. They do not view combat as a necessary evil or a regrettable duty. They view it as a test. When other species face overwhelming odds, they experience fear, despair, or resignation. When humans face the same situations, they experience excitement. Not because they are cruel, but because they have been conditioned by millions of years of evolution to see impossible challenges as opportunities to prove their worth. This creates a fundamental tactical advantage that cannot be overcome through superior numbers or better equipment. While their enemies are fighting for victory, humans are fighting for validation. While their enemies retreat when the cost becomes too high, humans become more determined. While their enemies see death as failure, humans see it as acceptable price for achievement. Most significantly, this psychological orientation appears to be contagious within human groups. Individual humans might show reasonable caution in safe situations, but, when grouped with other humans in combat situations, they reinforce each other's aggressive tendencies until the entire unit becomes willing to attempt seemingly impossible objectives. Commander Castelliron's final assessment was stark. Recommendation: avoid all future integrated operations with Terran forces. Their presence fundamentally alters the psychological dynamics of military operations in ways that compromise the effectiveness and welfare of non-Terran personnel. Humans should be utilized only in all human units, operating independently of Federation forces. The students absorbed this information in stunned silence. They were learning that the ban on human military service wasn't about protecting humans from the dangers of warfare. It was about protecting everyone else from the psychological impact of watching humans wage war. "There's something else," Seven said quietly. "I've been analyzing the timeline of these operations. The 17 major engagements mentioned in the Commandant's review all occurred within a period of 18 months. That's an incredibly compressed timeframe for military operations of this scale." "What does that mean?" Singera asked.
It means the humans weren't just effective in combat, Seven explained. They were so effective that they resolved conflicts faster than anyone expected. Wars that were projected to last years or decades were concluded in months.
ZYX's skin rippled with troubled patterns. That's actually terrifying. If they could end conflicts that quickly, what would happen if they ever decided the Federation itself was something that needed to be resolved?
That, Kreshtar said grimly, might be exactly what the Federation leadership has been worried about for the past 3 centuries.
Their investigation was revealing layers of complexity they hadn't anticipated. Each new piece of information raised more questions than it answered.
But one pattern was becoming increasingly clear: the ban on human military service wasn't about capability or compatibility.
It was about fear.
The Federation, which prided itself on unity and cooperation among diverse species, had encountered a member species that was so fundamentally different in their approach to conflict that they had to be isolated from military operations entirely.
We need to find out what happened to inhuman military involvement, Threx said finally.
There had to be some specific incident that triggered the ban. Something that made the Federation leadership decide that the risks outweighed the benefits.
I agree, Seven said.
But I suspect that incident will be classified at levels even higher than what we've accessed so far. We may need to consider alternative approaches.
Alternative approaches? ZYXthera asked. Seven's optical array dimmed slightly, indicating deep processing. What if, instead of trying to access more classified records, we approached a human directly?
The suggestion sent a chill through the group. The idea of confronting one of their human classmates with what they had learned seemed almost impossible to contemplate.
They might not even know, Singera pointed out.
Everything we've learned suggests this information has been suppressed for centuries.
Current generation humans might have no idea about their species' military history.
Or, Kreshtar said ominously, they might know exactly what we've discovered.
And they might not appreciate our curiosity. The question hung in the air between them: what do you do when you discover that some of your closest friends belong to a species that your government considers too dangerous for military service? And, more importantly, what do you do when you start to understand why?
The debate about whether to approach a human directly consumed the group for several days. They had crossed so many lines already that this final step felt both inevitable and terrifying. The more they learned about humanity's hidden military history, the more they realized they were dealing with something far beyond their original curiosity about administrative procedures. It was Seven who finally provided the push they needed to make a decision. I have identified a potential candidate for contact, the AI announced during one of their evening meetings.
Cadet Marcus Chun from the Diplomatic Corps program. He's human, obviously, but he's also demonstrated exceptional academic performance and emotional stability. More importantly, he's been asking questions. Questions about what?
Kreshtar asked, his crest rising with interest.
Seven accessed their data files.
Chen has been researching comparative military history for his senior thesis. His database queries show a pattern similar to our own initial investigation: searches for information about human military involvement that keep hitting classification barriers.
So he's already suspicious, ZYXthera observed.
That could make him more receptive to what we've learned, or more dangerous if he reports our activities. There's another factor, Seven continued. Chen is scheduled to graduate in 3 months and has applied for assignment to the Federation's Conflict Resolution Division.
If he's accepted, he'll eventually gain access to much of the information we've been searching for.
Threx's rocky features creased in thought. So either we approach him now, while he's still a cadet like us, or we miss our opportunity entirely. I think we have to do it, Singera said, her form pulsing with nervous energy. We've learned so much, but we're still missing crucial context.
We need the human perspective to understand what it all means.
They spent another week observing Marcus Chen, trying to assess his character and temperament.
What they saw was reassuring.
Chen was quiet but not withdrawn, intelligent but not arrogant. He had friends among multiple species and was generally well regarded by both students and faculty. More importantly, they noticed that he often seemed troubled by something, particularly during their shared military ethics course. While other students engaged enthusiastically with theoretical discussions about just war doctrine and rules of engagement, Chen would sit quietly, occasionally asking pointed questions that suggested he was wrestling with deeper issues. Finally, they decided to make contact. Zyxthera was selected as the initial approach, since her diplomatic background made her the most skilled at delicate conversations.
She waited until after a particularly intense military ethics seminar to approach Chen as he was gathering his materials.
Marcus, she said carefully, I was wondering if I could speak with you about something.
Your questions in class today were really insightful.
Chen looked up from his notes, his expression cautious but not unfriendly.
Thanks. Professor Valkathan always makes us dig deeper than the surface level, doesn't she?
She does,
Zyxthera agreed. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Some friends and I have been doing independent research on comparative military history, and we keep running into complications.
Chen's expression shifted subtly, becoming more alert. What kind of complications?
Classification barriers.
Particularly around historical Federation military operations involving human personnel.
Zyxthera watched his face carefully as she spoke.
For a moment, Chen's face went completely blank, a stillness that was somehow more telling than any dramatic reaction would have been.
Then, he set down his materials and looked directly at her. You've been researching the ban, he said quietly.
It wasn't a question. You know about it?
Chen glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard.
I know there is one. I know it's been in place for centuries.
And I know that nobody talks about why.
Would you be willing to discuss it with us?
My research group, I mean.
We've learned some things that we're having trouble understanding.
Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing risks and possibilities.
What kind of things?
Zyxthera took a deep breath.
Combat footage. Casualty reports. Psychological evaluations.
Things that suggest humans were banned from military service not because they were ineffective, but because they were too effective. Chen's reaction was immediate and visceral. His face went pale, and he actually took a step backward.
You accessed classified combat footage?
We didn't mean to, Zyxthera said quickly. We were just trying to understand why the restrictions existed, and one thing led to another.
How much do you know?
Chen's voice was barely above a whisper.
Enough to be terrified, Zyxthera admitted.
And enough to know that we need help understanding what it all means.
Chen stared at her for what felt like an eternity.
Then, finally, he nodded slowly.
Where do you want to meet?
They arranged to gather in Seven's lab that evening.
When Chen arrived, he looked like someone preparing for a trial rather than a study session.
His usual relaxed demeanor had been replaced by visible tension, and he carried himself with a careful control that reminded them uncomfortably of the military bearing described in the archived reports. Before we start, Chen said as soon as introductions were complete, I need to understand exactly what you've accessed.
The security implications could be severe for all of us.
Seven provided a comprehensive summary of their investigation, from the initial discovery of the restrictions through their access to the Commandant's archive review and their subsequent research into supporting documents.
Throughout the recitation, Chen's expression grew increasingly grim.
Operation Broken Chain, he said when Seven finished.
You actually heard the footage from Broken Chain. You recognize it? Kreshtar asked.
Chen laughed, but there was no humor in the sound.
Every human in the Federation knows about Broken Chain. It's just that we're not supposed to talk about it with non-humans. Why not?
Singara asked, her colors reflecting deep confusion.
Because, Chen said heavily, it represents everything that went wrong with human military integration. And everything that went right, depending on your perspective.
Chen moved to the center of the room, suddenly, looking much older than his 22 years.
You want the human perspective? Here it is. Everything you learned from those reports is true. Humans are different in combat situations. We don't fight the way other species fight. We don't think the way other species think.
And we don't stop the way other species stop.
But why? Zyxthera asked. What makes you so different? Chen considered the question carefully. Have any of you ever studied Earth ecology in detail?
When they shook their heads, he continued. Earth is what biologists call a death world. Not because it's particularly hostile compared to some planets, but because everything on it evolved in constant competition with everything else. No ecological niches were stable. No species could afford to be complacent. Chen began pacing, his movements reflecting the restless energy they had heard about in the combat reports.
Humans didn't evolve to be warriors.
We evolved to survive on a planet where everything was trying to kill us, including other humans. For millions of years, the difference between living and dying was the willingness to fight harder, run faster, think more creatively, and never, ever give up.
That still doesn't explain the psychological profiles we read, Freck said. The reports suggested humans actually enjoy combat.
Chen stopped pacing and looked directly at him.
Because we do.
The simple statement hung in the air like an accusation.
Not violence for its own sake, Chen clarified quickly. Not cruelty or sadism. But the challenge. The test. The opportunity to prove that we can overcome whatever obstacle we're facing. Seven's optical array focused intently on Chen. You speak as if you have personal experience with these feelings. Chen's expression darkened. Because I do. We all do. Every human carries this legacy, whether we want to or not.
But, you're in the diplomatic corps, Singara pointed out, her colors shifting to confused purple.
You chose non-violent conflict resolution as your specialty. I chose diplomacy, Chen corrected, because I understand what happens when diplomacy fails. And, I understand what humans become when we stop trying to be civilized. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in.
The ban isn't about protecting other species from human military effectiveness, Chen continued. It's about protecting other species from seeing what humans are really like when the gloves come off.
Because once you've seen that, you can never look at us the same way again. That's not fair, Zyxthera said softly.
You're our friends.
You're Federation citizens. You're part of our community. Chen smiled sadly. Are we? Or are we predators who've learned to wear the right masks?
That's ridiculous, Kreshtar said firmly.
I've served alongside humans in training exercises.
You're professional, capable, reliable. In controlled situations with artificial constraints and no real stakes, Chen interrupted.
What you read in those reports. That's what humans are like when the constraints are removed and the stakes are real.
Seven had been processing the conversation carefully. You're suggesting that modern humans are fundamentally the same as the ones described in the military reports, but that current social structures suppress their combat-oriented behaviors.
I'm not suggesting it, Chen said. I'm stating it as fact. Every human knows this about ourselves.
We just don't talk about it because it makes other species uncomfortable.
Freck's rocky features reflected deep concern. But that would mean every human in the Federation is potentially dangerous? Chen supplied. Yes.
Every human is potentially capable of the behaviors described in those reports.
We don't choose to be this way, but we can't choose not to be this way either. Then, how can the Federation trust you?
Singara asked, her distress evident in her rapidly shifting colors.
Because, Chen said, we choose every day to be better than our instincts. We choose diplomacy over aggression. We choose cooperation over competition. We choose to build instead of destroy. But, those are choices, not inevitabilities. The weight of this revelation settled over the group.
They had been thinking about the human military ban as a historical curiosity, but Chen was describing it as an ongoing necessity.
What happened to end human military service? Zyxthera asked. What was the specific incident that triggered the ban? Chen's expression became even more troubled. You really want to know? Even after everything you've already learned?
We need to know, Seven said.
We've committed too much to this investigation to stop now. Chen nodded slowly. The final incident was Operation Silver Dawn.
A rescue mission to evacuate Federation civilians from a planet under attack by raiders. Simple mission, low stakes, minimal combat expected. He paused, gathering himself for what was clearly a difficult story. The human unit assigned to the mission arrived to find that the raiders had taken hostages.
Standard Federation protocol would have been to negotiate, to find a peaceful solution that minimized casualties.
The human commander tried that approach for exactly 6 hours.
What changed? Kreshtar asked.
The raiders executed a child.
Chen's voice was flat, emotionless.
A young melodic girl, killed to demonstrate that they were serious about their demands.
The room went completely silent. After that, Chen continued, the human unit stopped following Federation protocols entirely. They didn't request permission for their actions.
They didn't coordinate with other Federation forces.
They simply went to war. What did they do? Singera whispered. They didn't just rescue the hostages, Chen said. They hunted down every raider on the planet. Every single one.
It took them 72 hours. When Federation backup finally arrived, they found 3,000 dead raiders and 12 human soldiers who had to be physically restrained from pursuing fleeing raiders into space.
7 processed this information rapidly. The psychological evaluation of those 12 soldiers showed no signs of trauma or regret, Chen confirmed.
They had enjoyed the hunt.
When asked if they would do the same thing again under similar circumstances, all 12 answered yes without hesitation. And that was enough to trigger the ban? Threk asked. That was enough to terrify the Federation leadership into realizing that humans weren't soldiers, Chen said. We were something else entirely.
Something that couldn't be controlled or predicted or safely integrated into civilized warfare.
Chen looked at each of them in turn. Now you know why the ban exists. And now you understand why humans don't talk about it.
Because once other species truly understand what we are, they can never trust us the same way again. The truth hung between them like a barrier. Their investigation had begun with innocent curiosity about administrative procedures and had ended with the discovery that some of their closest friends belonged to a species that their government considered fundamentally incompatible with civilized society.
So what happens now? Zyxthera asked quietly.
Chen shrugged. Now you have to decide whether you can still be friends with monsters who choose to be civilized. The weeks following Marcus Chen's revelation were among the most difficult any of the students had ever experienced. The knowledge they now carried felt like a weight that affected every interaction they had with their human classmates. Where once they had seen friends and colleagues, now they couldn't help but wonder about hidden depths and suppressed instincts. Zyxthera found herself studying her human friends during casual conversations, looking for signs of the predatory nature Chen had described. Kreshtar began analyzing human tactical suggestions in their joint exercises, wondering if their seemingly innovative approaches were actually expressions of something darker. Singera's colors remained muted and troubled for days at a time, reflecting her internal struggle with this new knowledge. Only 7 seemed largely unaffected, though their analysis of human behavior patterns had become noticeably more detailed and frequent.
It was Threk who finally forced them to confront what they were becoming.
We're doing exactly what the Federation leaders did 300 years ago, he said bluntly during one of their evening meetings.
We're letting fear override everything else we know about humans. Fear? Kreshtar's crest bristled with indignation. We learned that humans are capable of extraordinary violence when pushed to extremes, Threk interrupted. But we already knew humans were capable of violence. Every species is capable of violence. The question is whether that capability defines them. Zyxthera's crystalline skin flickered with uncertain patterns.
But Chen admitted it himself. He said every human carries this legacy, that they're all potentially dangerous.
So are we all, 7 observed quietly.
Every species represented in this room is descended from ancestors who survived by being effective at violence when necessary. The difference appears to be that humans retain more of those capabilities than most.
More? Singera's colors shifted to confused yellow. Chen described behaviors that go far beyond normal defensive capabilities. 7 activated a holographic display showing comparative species data.
Actually, upon reflection, I believe we may have been approaching this question incorrectly.
We've been assuming that human combat behaviors represent some kind of aberration or enhancement. But what if they represent something else entirely? What do you mean? Zyxthera asked. What if humans aren't unusually violent, 7 said, but unusually honest about their relationship with violence?
The idea hung in the air as they considered its implications. Think about our own species, 7 continued.
Veltarians like Zyxthera are descended from pack hunters who coordinated complex ambush tactics.
Zephyrians like Kreshtar evolved from aerial predators who struck without warning and showed no mercy to prey.
Gornish like Threk come from a species that resolved territorial disputes through ritualized combat that often ended in death.
But we evolved beyond those behaviors, Kreshtar protested.
Did we? 7 asked. Or did we simply develop social structures that channeled those behaviors into acceptable forms? Military training, competitive sports, corporate hierarchies that mimic pack dominance structures?
Threk's rocky features creased in thought. You're suggesting that all of our species still carry predatory instincts, but we've learned to suppress or redirect them. I'm suggesting that humans may be unique not in possessing such instincts, but in their ability to access them consciously when necessary, Seven clarified. Most species suppress their predatory behaviors so thoroughly that they become unavailable even in genuine survival situations. Humans appear to have maintained conscious access to their full behavioral spectrum. This perspective reframed everything they had learned. Instead of humans being uniquely violent, they might be uniquely honest about the reality of what war actually demanded. That would explain the psychological profiles, Singara said slowly, her colors shifting to thoughtful green. If humans can consciously access their predatory instincts, they wouldn't experience the internal conflict that other species feel during combat operations. And it would explain why other species found serving alongside them so disturbing, Zyxthera added. It wasn't just the effectiveness of human combat tactics, it was being confronted with aspects of warfare that other species had convinced themselves they could avoid.
Seven nodded.
The reports we accessed consistently described humans as enjoying combat, but perhaps what other species interpreted as enjoyment was actually just the absence of the internal resistance that makes combat traumatic for most beings. It was a paradigm shift that changed everything. Instead of humans being monsters, they might simply be the only species willing to fully embrace what warfare actually required.
But that still doesn't address the fundamental question, Kreshtar said. If humans can access these capabilities, what prevents them from becoming genuinely dangerous to other Federation species?
Before anyone could answer, they heard a soft knock on the laboratory door. They exchanged nervous glances.
Seven's lab was supposed to be secured, and unauthorized visitors were unlikely.
Come in, Seven called after a moment. The door opened to reveal Marcus Chen, followed by 3 other human cadets they recognized from various classes.
Chen looked tired but determined. We need to talk, he said simply.
We?
Zyxthera asked nervously. The human student body, said one of Chen's companions, a woman named Sarah Kim from the engineering program.
Word has gotten around that someone has been researching the ban. We've been waiting for this conversation for a long time.
The third human, David Rodriguez from Strategic Studies, stepped forward.
What Chen told you the other night was true, but it was incomplete.
We'd like to provide some additional context.
If you're willing to listen, added the fourth human, Elena Vasquez from Cultural Studies.
The non-human students looked at each other uncertainly.
They had thought they were prepared for the consequences of their investigation, but being confronted by multiple humans who apparently knew about their research was intimidating.
What kind of additional context?
Seven asked, their logical nature overriding their companion's nervousness. Chen gestured to his friends.
Sarah is a descendant of one of the soldiers who served in Operation Silver Dawn. David's great-grandfather was at Operation Broken Chain.
Elena has been researching the psychological and cultural impacts of the military ban for her senior thesis. Between the 4 of us, we can provide the perspective that's been missing from your research. The human perspective, Sarah said, on what it's like to live with the knowledge that your entire species is considered too dangerous for military service.
Threk looked around at his teammates, then nodded slowly.
We're listening. The humans arranged themselves in the center of the room, and Sarah began speaking. The first thing you need to understand, she said, is that the ban wasn't imposed on humanity.
It was requested by humanity. This revelation hit the group like a physical blow.
Everything they had assumed about the political dynamics behind the restriction was suddenly called into question.
Requested? Zyxthera managed to ask. Elena nodded.
After Operation Silver Dawn, human leadership realized that our species was having a negative psychological impact on Federation military operations. It wasn't just that we were effective in combat, it was that our presence was making other species less effective. The Federation had spent centuries developing military doctrines based on cooperation, mutual support, and shared sacrifice, David added.
Humans disrupted those dynamics simply by being present. Chen took up the narrative.
When human soldiers saw their non-human colleagues struggling with combat stress, their first instinct was to take over more of the dangerous responsibilities themselves. This created a cycle where humans became increasingly isolated within their own units, while other species began to feel useless or inadequate. Additionally, Sarah continued, human combat methods were causing what military psychologists called moral injury among allied forces. Other species were being exposed to levels of violence that their evolutionary development had prepared them to avoid, not embrace. 7 processed this information rapidly. So the ban was implemented to protect the psychological welfare of non-human personnel, not to restrict human capabilities. Exactly, Elena confirmed. Human leadership realized that our evolutionary heritage made us fundamentally incompatible with the kind of civilized warfare the Federation was trying to develop. So we voluntarily withdrew from military service. But that still doesn't explain how you managed the instincts Chen described, Singara said, her colors reflecting continued uncertainty. The 4 humans exchanged glances, and David spoke up. We managed them by channeling them into other activities. Extreme sports, competitive gaming, exploration of dangerous environments, research into challenging problems. Humans need outlets for our competitive and risk-taking drives, so we've developed an entire subculture around safe ways to satisfy those needs. Also, Chen added, we have extensive psychological support systems. Every human in the Federation undergoes regular counseling to help us process our instincts and maintain healthy relationships with other species. Sarah leaned forward. The most important thing you need to understand is that modern humans are not our ancestors. We've had 3 centuries to develop social and psychological tools for managing our heritage. We're not suppressing our nature, we're directing it toward constructive purposes. Think of it like this, Elena said. A Veltarian doesn't stop being a pack hunter just because they work in diplomacy. They use their pack coordination instincts to build effective teams. Humans work the same way. We use our competitive and strategic instincts to excel in whatever fields we choose. Threk rumbled thoughtfully. But the potential for violence is still there. Yes, all 4 humans said simultaneously, with such unified certainty that it was briefly unnerving. But potential doesn't equal inevitability, Chen continued. Every species in the Federation has the potential for behavior that would be destructive to galactic civilization. The key is choosing not to actualize that potential except in genuine emergencies. And emergencies like Operation Silver Dawn? Kreshtar asked. The human's expressions grew somber. Would probably produce the same results today, David admitted. If someone threatened children in front of a group of humans, our response would be swift and comprehensive. That aspect of our nature hasn't changed. But, Sarah added quickly, such situations are extremely rare in modern Federation space. The vast majority of conflicts are resolved through diplomatic means, economic pressure, or limited police actions that don't trigger human protective responses. 7 had been analyzing the conversation carefully. You're describing a species that has consciously evolved beyond their evolutionary programming while retaining access to it for genuine emergencies. That's actually a pretty good summary, Elena said. We've learned to live with our heritage rather than being controlled by it. Zyxthera looked around at her teammates, then back at the humans. Why are you telling us this? Chen made it sound like humans preferred to keep this knowledge secret. Because, Chen said, you've already learned the scary part. And you deserve to know the complete picture. Also, Sarah added, because it's time. 3 centuries of secrecy hasn't solved the underlying problem. Other species still don't understand humans, and humans still feel isolated from the broader Federation community. We think it's time to start having honest conversations about species differences, David said. All species differences, not just human ones. Elena nodded. Every species brings unique capabilities to the Federation. Melodic harmonic communication, Veltarian tactical coordination, Zephyrian strategic thinking, Gornish engineering persistence, AI computational power. Human capabilities just happen to be particularly suited to extreme situations. And, hopefully, Chen concluded, those extreme situations will remain rare enough that our capabilities stay theoretical rather than practical. The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed what they had learned. The investigation that had begun with simple curiosity about administrative procedures had revealed layers of complexity about species identity, Federation politics, and the nature of civilization itself. Finally, Threk spoke up. So what happens now? Do we report what we've learned? Keep it secret? Pretend nothing has changed? What happens now, Seven said thoughtfully, is that we continue to be friends and colleagues, but with a better understanding of each other's capabilities and limitations. And, maybe, Singara added, her colors finally stabilizing into a warm, accepting pattern, we start having more honest conversations about what it means to be a multi-species civilization.
Extraterrestrial looked directly at Chen. I have one more question. Ask away. After everything we've learned, everything we've discussed, I need to know. Are you still the same person I thought you were before all this started? Chen considered the question seriously. I'm exactly the same person I've always been. The only difference is that now you know more about what that means. And, that's enough, Extraterrestrial said firmly. For me, that's enough. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Their investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature and Federation history, but it had also demonstrated something more important, that knowledge, even difficult knowledge, could be the foundation for deeper understanding rather than greater fear. The military ban on humans would continue, but the barrier of ignorance between the species had been permanently lowered. And, sometimes, that's the most important victory of all. Well, Kreshtar said as the meeting began to wind down, I think we can safely say our investigation is complete. Actually, Seven said with what might have been amusement in their voice, I believe our real education is just beginning. As the group began to disperse, Chen lingered for a moment. Thank you, he said to the non-human students. For being willing to look beyond the scary parts to see the whole picture. Thank you, Extraterrestrial replied, for trusting us with the truth. And, in that moment, they all understood that knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, was always preferable to comfortable ignorance. Because only by understanding each other completely could they build a civilization worthy of the stars.